The Garden Variety newsletter brings the gardening community to you. Together, we'll learn about all things horticulture, celebrate our successes, and gather expert answers to your questions. Subscribe at ipr.org/GV. This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. Conifers can add a lot to a landscape: color, texture, and they're great for windbreaks. But Iowa isn't always good for conifers. The list of recommended species has been dwindling in recent years. Today, we'll find out how to give conifers the best chance to survive and thrive. Jeff Isles is a professor of horticulture at Iowa State University. Hello, Jeff.
Charity, good to hear from you. Good to see you. Good to be with you.
It's great to talk with you, Jeff. And you'll notice that I have learned my lesson from making mistakes in the past, and I am specifically talking about conifers. I have not called them evergreens because although there is overlap, Jeff Isles taught me that they're not all evergreens. What makes a tree a conifer?
Well, conifer, if you break the word down, just means a plant that bears its seeds in cones. So, lots of plants can do that, and some are evergreen, some are deciduous. But it does my heart good to hear you say the word conifer on the air. It's one of those reaffirming things, Now, if you really want to take it to the next degree, it's not conifer, but it's conifer. So it's more of a long O. At least some of my conifer friends pronounce it that way. So
yeah, I'm gonna go with conifer just because that's how I normally hear it. But all right, conifers in Iowa, we love them. We love to put them in a landscape. They look beautiful. They can be great in a windbreak, but they don't always do well here. In fact, they often don't do well here. Why is that?
Yeah. If you were to go back by time travel and look at the landscape 150 years ago, you wouldn't see many conifers. This is just not conifer country. We have native conifers in the northeastern part of the state, but I think it's our heat, it's our drought, it's our wild swings in temperature, but I think it's more moisture related. So we don't live in a part of the world where conifers normally do well, except for the real tough guys like eastern red cedar. And I would include white pine in that group because they're pretty tough. But I just think it's our environment. That doesn't mean we can't grow them. We're very successful growing conifers in managed landscapes, but the native landscape didn't include very many.
So when we decide that we do want to put a conifer in the environment, we'll get to that list of species that do better in Iowa a little bit later, in addition to eastern red cedar and white pine. When you're choosing that spot in your landscape, what do you need to be thinking about to give that tree the best opportunity?
Well, we always start with ultimate size. So if we know how big the plant is going to get, then we can locate it appropriately in the landscape. We've all seen those junipers or spruce planted in front of the picture window that have obscured the view. So know something about the mature size. But generally speaking, full sun and well-drained soil. Now, we would all like well-drained soils. We don't always have that. But conifers don't like heavy, wet soils for the most part. So give them well-drained soils in full sun, and you'll have pretty good luck with most of them. But don't forget size, because all too often we choose a plant that we think we can maintain and keep small, but they outlive us and they outgrow us, so be careful.
Our desire for trees is often bigger than our yards. I think that is a common problem. So there are so many reasons that people want to plant a conifer in their landscape. And certainly if you drive around a town, if you drive on a highway, you will see a lot of dead conifers in people's yards. So tell me about some of the limitations of using conifers in the landscapes that we've created.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's those few bad apples that cause problems and give the entire group of plants a bad name. So I love spruce. Spruce is a good group of conifers that we use a lot of in the state. But there are some disease issues, especially with our friend the Colorado blue spruce. which we have planted a lot of. But there are some fungal diseases that wear on them and cause them to have shortened lifespans, shortened functional lifespans. And that's probably what you notice as you're driving around town. Um, Austrian pine is another one that has significant disease problems, which has pretty much eliminated it from our plant palettes. So I think of disease. I think of ultimate size. People get turned off by the fact that there's this behemoth growing in the neighborhood that they did never envisioned. But when I think, and this kind of runs counter to what I just said before, we live in an area of the world where it can be droughty, but in the spring of the year it can be wet, and that's when diseases are most active, at least on some of these conifers. So when you're choosing a conifer for the landscape, again, take into account size, but also disease resistance, to a lesser degree insect resistance, but you don't want to bring a plant into the landscape that's going to cause trouble or have a much shortened lifespan.
So let's talk about what species we should plant in Iowa. And you already mentioned two that are native to Iowa, the eastern red cedar. Nobody plants the eastern red cedar on purpose. Very few people plant the eastern red cedar on purpose these days. Am I right about that?
Well, let me come to their defense. Now, there are some cultivars of eastern red cedar that are really quite beautiful. They have beautiful fruit. They're tough as nails. The foliage quality can be quite nice. That doesn't mean they're not going to seed themselves all over the landscape, but there are some selections of eastern red cedar that might surprise you. So don't throw them all out, but be aware of what you're inviting to the landscape.
Well, and they're everywhere, regardless of the fact that a lot of people don't plant them. I have nothing against eastern red cedar. I have lived in the country in Iowa for the vast majority of my life, and
sure,
they are a lovely part of the landscape. Although sometimes you do have to battle them a little bit. Let's talk about white pine because again, that's native. But is it native to the entire state?
No, it's only native in the northeastern part of the state. And again, that word native is a slippery one because what does that really mean? So to our best of our knowledge, it is native to that northeastern part of the state. Of course, the further north you go and the further east you go, you find huge tracts of eastern white pine. In fact, the Revolutionary War was fought, it may be in part because of eastern white pine, and the British Navy used them for ship masts, so very, very useful plant in that regard. But eastern white pine was a predominant conifer species in much of the upper Midwest. Anyway, we make great use of eastern white pine. They're large growing. As they get older, they become rather thin and very picturesque, really. But they're not a plant that's going to give you a solid mass of greenery, especially as it gets older.
So tell me what you have on your list. I mentioned that the list of recommended species has declined in recent years. So what do you tell people they should be planting?
Well, let's start with spruce because those are the ones that people often point to as being problematic. And yes, Colorado spruce has kind of fallen off of my list. But I still like Norway spruce, which is a classic windbreak plant. We live in a part of the world where we like and need windbreaks. Norway spruce grows fast, but it's not foolproof. White spruce is another one that we often use in windbreaks. Is not foolproof, but is still fairly reliable. One that I like for ornamentation for the managed landscape is a spruce called Serbian spruce that is really very, very graceful. So I like that. Again, remember, spruce are not without disease issues. So whenever you invite them into the landscape, you have to be aware of what you're getting. Another major group of conifers are the firs, and white fir is a very reliable species, provided you put it on a well-drained soil. They do not like heavy, wet soils at all, but white fir is pretty reliable. And from a distance will fool you. It looks a little bit like the Colorado blue spruce. And then you have a whole swath of pines. Besides white pine, you've got one called Swiss stone pine, which comes from Central Europe. Korean pine, of course, from Korea. Both of these are lesser known, but are really quite winter hardy and really quite adaptable to the Iowa landscape.
I think that when people plant windbreaks, and people just like uniformity, we tend to plant a whole bunch of the same conifer on the edge of a yard or in a windbreak. And we have seen these diseases take out a whole bunch of trees in recent years. Are we just inviting problems if we do that, even though it may be aesthetically pleasing?
Yeah. I'm not the windbreak expert. Billy Beck would be a far better person to answer this question. However, I never want to give an opinion. I think even in a windbreak, you can have diversity. And so you don't have to plant just 100 feet of spruce or pine or anything. You can mix and match. I like groupings, maybe groupings of the same plant side by side, but you can mix things up, and there's plenty of room for diversity even in a windbreak like we use here in the state.
So we've talked about when you're starting from scratch, trying to make sure that you give that conifer the best chance to survive and thrive. A lot of us have conifers in our landscape already that may be struggling. Are there things we can do to help adult trees do better?
I'm not sure we can do a whole lot when plants are adult and they've kind of set in their ways. What I like to do is when I see a plant in the landscape that's only been there a couple of years and it's struggling, I look at how it was planted. We have a lot of conifers in our yard, and we just did an assessment this past week about plants that were grown in containers and have really bad root systems. And I should have done something at the time they were installed, but my wife and I went back and dug a few up and corrected some of the girdling root problems that we saw in these containers, and then put them back in the ground. And with any luck, they'll still be alive. So really, Charity, it comes back to the day of installation. We can save ourselves a lot of heartache by planting things properly, especially if they were grown in a pot, because those roots will tend to be spiraling, circling around, and the day of installation is the time to fix those problems. When a plant's been in the ground 20 years, it's really hard to fix them.
Sure.
And then you're kind of stuck.
And when you see that, when a plant comes out of a pot and you see those roots all wrapped around, what do you do, Jeff, briefly?
It's disappointing when nurseries are selling stock like this, but it's pretty common. But if I see roots that are wrapping around the trunk and wrapping around each other, I've got a special pair of pruners that I use to start trimming. And then I try to separate them and spread them out, so when I put that plant in the ground, I don't have roots that are crossing or strangling each other.
Jeff Isles, professor of horticulture at Iowa State University. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe.
Iowa Public Radio is your home for news, music, and culture. And the Iowa Public Radio app is your connection. Catch the latest news, enjoy music picked for you, discover something new about the state you call home. Connect to IPR, no matter where you are. Download the app for your Apple or Android device in the App Store, or visit ipr.org/app.
Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio Talk Show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.